Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, try as he might, can't stop repeating, "My God, it's full of stars."
Tim Longo. It's not coming to me. I'm not getting...
That one's tricky. It's from
tricky.
2010.
What?
It's equal to 2001, A Space Odyssey, that people always think it's part of, but it was in the book. So, it's...
Oh, my goodness. That is the deepest
deep science fiction
you've maybe ever had.
Alien cut there for you.
Nice, yeah.
I like to educate people.
Good, yeah. Go out and read the book, everybody. Keeping with the theme, we are, of course, talking and continuing to talk about X-COM, or originally UFO Enemy Unknown. And you want me to just jump right in, Brett?
Jump right in and introduce our guest.
Yes, we are super excited to cap off this series of a whopping 5 episodes of the original game, and then we did one bonus episode playing the Firaxis Modern game. But we have Julian Gollop here, legendary and veteran game developer, starting back... 82-ish, I think, in your career, sir. And I'll just run through a couple of your notable things here so we can kind of let everyone know. Although we did, in our first episode, hit some of these. Julian and his brother Nick really kind of the forefathers of... some of the forefathers of the tactical turn-based combat games. And so early on, some of the notable games that you guys created... under Mythos Games, of course, UFO Enemy Unknown, which in North America, I believe, became X-COM, and then the X-COM series all the way up through Apocalypse. But then even before that, Laser Squad being sort of another big notable game that people reference from 1988. Lords of Chaos, of course, was another one that people talk a lot about. Rebel Star before that. In 86 and 88 for Rebel Star 2. And then after Mythos Games, kind of creating Kodo Technologies, which Laser Squad Nemesis was a game I have fond memories of playing with a buddy, which was another good addition and modern inclusion of continuing the XCOM or UFO defense legacy. And then moving through that, working at Ubisoft for a while, and then founding Snapshot Games, which I think maybe we'll hear a little bit about what you guys are up to right now with Snapshot later in the episode. But thank you for joining us. We are honored, and I'm very excited to have you on.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, and it's really fantastic that you've taken the trouble to play through and make 4 or 5 podcasts on the game. It's an extraordinary thing to do. I salute your perseverance for sure.
Well, I think it's a game that rewards many hours of discussion. We were still coming up with new topics as we went on, and there were a few even that we didn't get to. But we're really happy to have you on to talk a little bit about its development. I don't know where to begin, but I guess why switch to the aliens? Why? So you've been doing Laser Squad, which I remember a bit, and more from the Nemesis remake. How'd you come up across this, and where was the genesis of this game?
The genesis of XCOM is basically a coincidence of several things. So basically, we took a demo to Microprose UK, and we called it Laser Squad 2. So it's kind of just following in the progression of the previous Laser Squad game that we've done. It did add the fully isometric graphics, and it had this 3-dimensional sort of sense of the battlefield. Bullets can go up and down as well as left and right. But it really didn't have much more than that. It was a very basic demo. So we took this to Microprose, and there was a guy there, Stephen Hands, one of their designers, who was a big fan of Laser Squad, basically. And without him, XCOM wouldn't have been made, because the demo itself didn't impress many other people there. But what they were thinking, what they wanted, was a game that would compete with Civilization. So they wanted a big game, and they told us it had to have an equivalent of the Civilopedia, and it had to have like a research system in it. And the other requirement they gave us was that it had to be set on Earth, and based on a UFO theme. What they were thinking about mostly was Jerry Anderson's UFO TV series, which you may not be familiar with, but in that show it had aliens trying to land on the Earth, and there were like 3 levels of interception. There were moon-based interceptors, and there were sky-based interceptors, and then finally there were ground-based interceptors. So, and there was this organization called Shadow, which was like this worldwide organization that tried to intercept these aliens. So obviously we took some things from there. Shadow.
Whoa! So what is this show called? I'm not familiar with it. I feel
it's just called UFO. It's by Jerry Anderson, who did. He made
Space 1999.
Yeah, and Space 1999
Are you serious?
Is probably more well known. UFO is older than that. It's an old series.
Oh,
the most disappointing thing about UFO was the fact that the aliens looked exactly like humans, except they breathed some kind of liquid rather than breathing air or something. It's kind of most disappointing
for the budget,
thing.
Maybe.
yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
But we did take the idea of the air-based interceptions and ground-based interceptions, a very key part in the X-COM sort of game design. So I guess those were the requirements, but they didn't really. There were no more details than that. We did talk a bit about cool things you could research and what technology there might be, but I somehow had to use this Laser Squad 2 thing that I had, and then sort of merge it into this some kind of overall strategic level game. I think very early on I suggested the idea of having this like world view, this like rotatey, spinny world thing, which we called the geoscape, as your sort of your world map, your base of operations. And I put together a little design document, which was roughly 16 pages long, wasn't very long. But nonetheless, it had all the key elements of the game in there. The only other thing, the other thing that I added to it, apart from taking Laser Squad 2 and Jerry Anderson's UFO, was a book based on sort of UFO folklore, I guess, because I wanted to have something in there which is, I really didn't like the aliens in Jerry Anderson's UFO were rubbish, so we had something more interesting. And in this book, which is a book called Alien Liaison by Timothy Good, he had this stuff by this guy Bob Lazar, who claimed to be working at Area 51, reverse engineering UFOs and stuff. And I thought, well, this stuff has really got to go in the game. And the whole idea of Element 115 comes from this guy Bob Lazar.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so his claims about the government reverse engineering sort of UFOs, is the idea that we borrowed very much. The idea that you would capture the UFO technology and you would reverse engineer it and make your own stuff, make your own tech based on it. So that came from that book, as did also the stuff about abductions and cattle mutilations and stuff, which was included in the game. Sadly, we also wanted to put the Men in Black in the game, but Microprose told us to take them out because of some reasons which I'm not too sure about. But we did have a little sort of animated sprite for them, which was pretty cool. So that's how it came about. So it's a combination of those things.
Wow. Yeah, you hit one of my questions that I definitely wanted to ask was influences, and you hit many of those there in some of the examples. And the other interesting topic you hit there that we do talk about from time to time, but I actually am surprised to hear some of what you just mentioned there as far as your relationship with Microprose as a publisher. Are there any other? So I'm actually intrigued that they had so many sort of parameters that they had given you, and that it was in our heads when we play these older games, and I think everyone kind of always just assumes that it's all kind of coming from that soup of the creators and kind of finding that perfect formula. But in your in the case you were saying, it's like they said they wanted a direct competitor to Civ, and they wanted to take on place on Earth and these certain things. So I'm actually really fascinated by that. Are there any other publisher kind of stories with that relationship, or did you hit them all maybe there?
What they wanted, the way they explained it to us was, we want to have a big game. And they kept saying this stuff. So what they didn't really tell us at the time is that the Microprose UK were desperate to prove themselves, and they were, pejoratively known as the toy department within Microsoft Worldwide Operations, because Microprose UK got to do, console conversions and other stuff, and development sort of in-house was very, sort of less prestige projects, and they really wanted something that could match the best of what the US company was doing. Of course, Civilization was the big thing. This was 1991, the year of release of Civilization, so they just were extremely ambitious, and they sort of imposed that ambition upon us. To be honest, I was a willing accomplice. I thought that the basic ideas that they were putting to us were absolutely great. We ran with it. It was too ambitious because it took us ages to make the game, but I think without that input from Microprose originally, what we would have ended up with was just a sort of Laser Squad 2, a Laser Squad sequel.
It's remarkable to me that they wanted to cannibalize their own company that way. I mean, it's just strange that having Civilization already in the bag, but that's interesting that it was basically because it was the UK branch and they felt like they didn't get enough respect. That's fantastic. Wow.
So the other kind of topic when it comes to influences that we talked about, I'd love to hear if there's any topics in this category of kind of board game influence, and because and this probably goes back farther than obviously UFO defense, with your games and the genre that you kind of focused on. We're still focused on, like, was tabletop gaming a big part of your background and your life, and kind of bringing that turn-based tactical element into it? Was that part of it, or was that just an assumption we were making?
I mean, sure. I had a group of friends who were really into miniatures wargaming, especially sci-fi gaming, believe it or not. So we often I think they had a collection of rules which were mostly their own, a collection of miniatures which we used. We had these sort of big sci-fi melee things once per year. Apart from that, the biggest influences were definitely board games. Two in particular stand out. One is Squad Leader, which is still going strong, actually, believe it or not. And the other one is a game called Sniper, which was published by SPI. Virtually unplayable in its board game format because it required the players to use this move system, simultaneous movement system. Basically, you had to write down on a piece of paper the plan for each of your soldiers' moves, and then this was sort of simultaneously executed by both players after they've plotted their moves.
Well, it sounds like Robo Rally.
Yeah, except more complicated. I mean, the original Sniper, which was World War II sort of squad-based tactical game, was really good. I mean, they did keep developing it. In fact, there was a sci-fi version of it made. It's a highly underrated and not well-known game, but that was a big influence in a lot of my games, to be honest. And in fact, it was only until Laser Squad Nemesis that we actually introduced a simultaneous movement plotting system like the original board game Sniper, interestingly enough.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, now that I think about it. Yeah, I was terrible at Nemesis, but I played with a buddy at work when I was at LucasArts, and he would always tromp me, but yeah, the simultaneous system was really interesting and different. I think that's why it stuck with us, because it was just a little extra spin on things. But yeah, cool. So another interesting thing that we like to talk about, especially with a game of this era, is almost like responsibilities in like what areas that you worked on, and maybe Nick as well, your brother, and because the teams were smaller, right? And I think a lot of our listeners really are interested to know, because game development these days is so different. And it depends, because we have the indie movement, so that, a lot of teams are kind of echoing those old days again. But what kind of stuff did you work on versus Nick? And because you were doing game design, but you were also programming, I believe, right? And I think you're even credited with some animation. So what was the development process like for you and Nick, and how did you divide things up?
Well, it was very simple because there was basically me and Nick at Mythos Games, and there were two artists at Microprose for the duration of the project. One was John Wrights, who did the character art and some other stuff as well, and there's another guy called Martin Smiley who did most of the sort of environment graphics. So I basically supervised those two guys remotely. I was doing a lot of programming as well, and also game design. Nick was doing some of the really heavy duty stuff. He programmed all of the geoscape rendering, which, although it kind of looks pretty basic these days,
it's remarkable for the time. Absolutely.
At the time, it was completely
time of day, and
nothing like that had been done before. It's like a completely original piece of programming. There's no spinny, rotaty, zoomable globe with the sun going around the Earth, or the Earth going around the sun, whatever you want.
Yeah.
In that case, it was in fact the sun going around the Earth. So it was it. So he did that really, really heavy duty, difficult code on that side. I think he did a lot of the AI. I did a lot of the geoscape systems and all of the interface stuff on the geoscape side, all the base management stuff. So that's basically how we divided it. Most of my time was probably spent programming, to be honest. And usually we discuss the game. And they had a producer as well. I can't forget our producer, because he would turn up visitors once per month, and we would go to the pub and have a few pints of beer, and he would ask us how it's going, and we said, yeah, it's great. If he was lucky, he would get a disc to take away with him of our progress, and that was it. It was very, very laid back indeed, up towards the end of the project where it suddenly got extremely intense. There was a big change.
Tell us a little bit about that, because you had mentioned earlier that it went long. So were they starting to get a little, I don't know, tetchy or irritated or impatient?
What happened is kind of a bit weird, really. So we signed a contract which was for 18 months, and 18 months came and went, and they just continued paying us, and we were getting very worried, because they thought, oh my goodness, we've gone over budget, they're going to cancel the project any moment, oh my goodness. What we didn't know was that when Spectrum Holobyte purchased Microprose, they did in fact cancel the project, but Microprose UK kept the project going, largely because it wasn't very visible to anyone visiting the Microprose UK studio, because the only guy working on it at the UK studio was John Wrights. Martin, who was doing the environment graphics, worked at home, and obviously me and Nick worked at our office back in Harlow. So and because it was a very low budget development, they just kept the game going up to the point where Spectrum Holobyte were desperate for a product, a release, before their end of year, for the end of quarter, for their financial results.
My mouth is open right now. This is very amazing.
What Microprose UK then said is that they told Spectrum Holobyte, well, look, that game that you told us to cancel, well, it's still going, and in fact it's nearly finished, and you can have it by March 1994.
Oh my goodness.
Because they didn't tell us any of this. I mean, what they said to us. No, what they said to us, well, look, we really need the game by March 1994. It's very, 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 very important. What we didn't know is that they'd made this commitment to Spectrum Holobyte, and we didn't know how that Spectrum Holobyte were just desperate to have something that they can put in their account for that month.
It's pretty ironic that this game then was basically built under the radar of any game to be built.
Oh my goodness!
It's very, very much built under the radar. And in fact, even in its early stages, it was a very low key development for Microprose. I mean, they were, after we signed the contract, they were focused on all kinds of other stuff, especially big internal developments, many of which got cancelled. But one thing that saved the game internally at Microprose UK was that we put the game into QA, so they had a little QA department at Microprose, and they really liked UFO as it was then, and they really, really wanted to keep it. And they're the ones who successfully managed to keep the game going at Microprose UK. Although the version that we'd given them at that point was just barely playable. I mean, it really was very, 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 very rough. The tactical side of the game was reasonably well developed, but the strategic side and the way everything interacted was just a complete mess. Really, the game was pretty much put together in the last 3 months, I think. And it was very intensive development because we had to go and work in-house at Microprose UK, and we were working there 7 days a week, 10 hours a day for 3 months or something like that, just to get the game.
Oh, they brought you on site, basically.
Yeah, they did. They brought us
see it all through. Yeah. Keep their eye on you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because they took a bit of a risk because they said, "Oh yeah, we can deliver the game by March 1994."
Right.
But they must have known it was in a pretty rough state. I mean, it just wasn't anywhere near release quality.
Did they? But they must have known. You said that they liked it, and they must have seen sort of through that, right, to see the gem that was in there, and they probably said, "Okay, this is something special." Otherwise, they wouldn't have committed to it, probably. Right?
Sure.
So
yeah.
They identified it. Yeah.
Yeah, they did.
So the simulation you mentioned, sort of like the ground. At that point, you guys knew. It sounds like, especially because of Later Squad, you kind of knew what the ground combat needed to be, the ground phase. Can you talk a little bit about? We did talk a fair amount on the podcast about the two different, essentially the two different gameplay loops with the management sim part, on the management of the whole sort of geoscape and the base management and stuff. And so where was that coming from? Was that the Civilization influence, where they wanted you to have something more simulation based across the planet, or was that from?
They didn't say that. I mean, I guess because I tend to like more simulation-y approach to doing things. I like systems, and systems have some kind of logic and rationale behind them, which somehow relates to some world that you're trying to simulate. So, I liked all this stuff, the sort of geopolitical stuff where, you've got the countries funding you, but they get upset if there's alien activity and you're not dealing with it. And and at the same time, the aliens have their own specific sort of sequence of things that they're trying to do. And they would usually start in a region, and they would start doing, they'd have to do 6 patrol missions, and if they do this successfully, then they start doing some abduction missions, and if they do 3 of those, then they do some terror missions, and then they try and build a base, and then they try and supply the base, and there's 5 or 6 supply missions, and if they do that, then there's a continuous and increasing chance that if that base is inside a country, that country will get infiltrated and taken over and will cut their funding.
Amazing.
So that's what happened to me.
I mean, you can basically, what you can do is slow the aliens' progress down. Like you say, if they normally require to do a fixed number of missions, so they've got to do those 6 patrol missions before they go on to the abduction missions. If you shoot down one of their patrol ships before it finishes the mission, then they have to do another one because they haven't done their 6 missions. So you can sort of slow their progress down that way. Although with the base, once they've built a base, can be very dangerous, but then again can also be very rewarding because the supply ships tend to be full of loot. In fact, it's good if they build a base in a country which is not very important, because then you can just keep trying to intercept the supply ships. And,
right. In my case, the United States.
That's probably the worst country. You could let them build a base in.
I didn't know what was going on down there, and I have seen the supply ships go in, and I've been like, and I just haven't had the power to I tried to run to go in there as soon as I realized it was a base, and at that point I was already way underpowered to be able to take on that base. I didn't have sufficient armor. I may not have had any armor at that point. So I've been slowly trying to get my research to a point where I feel comfortable. So that was my next task.
just a question about it. What difficulty level were you playing the game on?
We both played on beginner level.
That's the lowest difficulty level, is it? Or
yes. Oh yeah.
I thought that. I can't remember what the level was called.
We definitely want to talk about difficulty in a little bit, because that's a macro topic we spend a lot of time on. But before we go there, I wanted to follow up on I think you kind of answered my question, but one question I had. I have a friend at work who. Game designer Chris Blum, who's obsessed with the game, kind of a definitive game in his gaming career, and influenced him as a game designer. And he's a systems designer himself. And he had this theory this whole time that there was sort of like a counter campaign that the aliens were running against you, because it always felt like they had their own objectives that they were doing and things. And you kind of just confirmed that. Yes. That basically they're playing their side of the game the same way you are playing yours, and if you don't kind of keep track of that and keep tabs on them, then they will win essentially. So that's true. It sounds like
that's true. Yes, yeah, but it was very simple. It wasn't anything terribly complex. But yes, they followed their own specific sort of plan, and you can upset their plan. Right. You can slow it down. You probably can't stop it forever, but you can slow their progress down there.
And the key is just to know what they're doing, because like you said, they'll attempt their certain number of missions, and you may or may not know that they're doing those missions. But if you don't see them, then they're going to successfully do them and progress.
Exactly,
it sounds like. I see.
Yeah, they can succeed in doing their missions out of sight, and you won't know. Yeah. Unless you've got radar bases there, or you're patrolling, or you won't see them doing their stuff, but they'll be doing it for sure.
Fascinating. Yeah, and on the difficulty side, we definitely, we like I said in the beginning of the episode, we played 5 episodes of the core game, and the only other series that we've played 5 episodes on, Brett, you said it was Final Fantasy IX, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, which is also a very long game, and we weren't sure, because this was our first... The reason that we're excited to have you on is this is actually for the podcast. We've been doing it about 1.5 years, and so we played quite a few games at this point. But this was our first fully simulated procedural, game. A lot of the others have been crafted in different ways. So we wanted to have you on to kind of talk about the construction of a simulation-based game, and it sounds like it's really your, what you like to do is the most as well. So they're perfect to talk about that, and the difficulty curve and sort of the way the sim, because we were debating, as Brett was sort of just saying about his story of his playthrough right now. There's still a chance he may lose, and there's an inherent challenge with dynamic difficulty, in a game where it's hard, it's opaque to know exactly what's going on, and you could play. I think Brett's about 40 hours in, and he still may not accomplish, and myself as well. I'm 30 hours in, but neither of us, by the way, have technically finished, quote unquote, just so you know. We basically ran out of time, but I'm still enjoying playing, and I'm going to continue playing. But can you kind of, I guess, like, talk through the simulate, what you really love about simulation, and some of the categories that we talked about was how you scale difficulty. So I'll just throw a grab bag out there, and you can kind of pick and choose, and you don't have to cover all the topics because it's probably long, but scale the difficulty based on the simulation and the dynamism of it. Go ahead.
Yeah,
John.
sure. Yeah, this is a big topic. Well, you see, here's the thing. I was never able to play through the game from start to finish, or even anything approaching close to playing through the whole game during the game's development. And we had a big problem. As I've already said, we like 3 months to finish the game.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of complex systems interacting here. We had a QA team. There's four guys there. They're best, but there's only 4 of them.
Yeah, holy cow!
And 4. So you can imagine that we were making changes right up to the master date. I was literally programming the day before the disc was sent off to be.
Oh, that is scary.
Oh my gosh! For a game like this, it is just like like almost House of Cards kind of, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of very scary, and I was very worried that the game about how to actually balance the difficulty levels in the game. I had a number of different difficulty levels, and I think this was probably close to the end, probably 5 or 6 weeks before the end. I decided to add a little bit of a dynamic difficulty adjustment system in. There's a very simple thing. Basically, we just kept track of the previous 3 or so, maybe in 3 or 4 tactical missions that the player had undertaken. It just recorded the score that the player got. If the player is doing badly, basically in tactical missions, then the alien tech progress tree sort of slowed down or halted, basically. If you were trouncing the aliens, then their tech tree would sort of accelerate a bit.
Interesting.
And I put this in because there was just no way that we could properly test the game.
Yeah.
There's no way I could do it. There's no way even the QA team, even though there's 4 of them, could do it within the sort of 6 weeks that we had left. I guess it's a moment of panic, but it did prevent us from detecting a rather serious bug, which is the save game bug, whereby if you saved the game and reloaded it, it basically reset the difficulty back to the lowest difficulty level. And we never detected this bug, partly because the dynamic difficulty system was sort of obscuring the sort of the basic difficulty settings. I think this bug is now fixed. It was fixed in one of the re-releases of the game, and I think it's fairly sure it's fixed on the version which is currently on Steam. But it wasn't the version that was actually released originally.
Oh man.
So there was that dynamic difficulty thing in, but of course the problem with any simulation game with all these interacting systems is that if you want to test the difficulty, then you would have to play it with different qualities of player against all the difficult settings from start to finish multiple times before you can really fine tune it, which is enormously difficult, very, very difficult. Having said that, I still do love simulation-y style gaming because I love the idea that you've got this interacting systems that are just doing stuff even without the player doing anything. You've got a world out there which is doing its own thing. Things are happening. It's something I did a lot more thoroughly in X-COM Apocalypse, and something we're doing even more thoroughly in Phoenix Point, because although with Phoenix Point, which is my new game, which is very XCOM style in the way it's set up, it has a geoscape in it, it's got turn-based tactical missions, but on the strategic side it's much more simulation-y, in a sense that it's actually in a way closer to Civilization than because it includes these factions which sort of operate a little bit like empires in Civilization, have their own AI, their own tech trees. It has a lot of random setup in the way the world's sort of established at the beginning of the game, and that's influence from the very first Civilization is actually even stronger in Phoenix Point than it was in the original XCOM. So I still like the idea that the player has a sense that he's fighting some kind of malevolent presence that has some kind of intelligence. It's not the same intelligence as you have as the player, but it's some kind of intelligence. It knows some things that you don't know, and you know some things that it doesn't know also.
Yeah.
And, that is intrigues me. That style of game intrigues me still to this day, and I am still pursuing it.
I'm glad that you are.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the tech tree. So, for the aliens. So is the tech tree basically the enemy types that you'll encounter, I guess?
Yes. So there's a sort of progression in the enemy types that you get all the way up to the ethereals, I think, which are at the top. I think there's some randomization in it. I think there are several base level types, and each base level type has an attached terror unit. The Greys have got the cyber discs, and I think most of them have also got another sidekick type thing, like the silicoids and stuff like that. And so the way the progression works is based on a whole set of deployment tables for every UFO and every base and every terror mission, and there are variations within, because you get sectoid commanders, and there's basic sort of ranks within the aliens as well. Each one has some kind of leader type figure, which is better stats and so on. So that's how the progression works. A series of tables you send. There's a lot of randomness still in it, so it's never completely fixed. So my table will say, well, in this, so we're at level 10 in terms of the alien progression. And I think the progression was also separate for each region of the Earth, by the way. So each region had its own progression level.
Huh.
And basically, the aliens had to proceed through their plan in each of the regions of the Earth. So at level 10, this is the alien supply ship. It can have between 2 and 3 of this alien type, and 4 and 6 of this one, and so on. So there's a little bit of randomness thrown in as well. So that's how it works. Very simple.
It feels like a board game kind of design in terms of, one of the ones we mentioned, I think, on the show is Pandemic, where you're playing these systems on the board, which are very visible. You can tell exactly what's going on, but you kind of get the randomness from cards and things like that you can reorder as you play. But yeah, that was what I thought was probably going on, although not quite to that level of having progression per area of the globe and all that stuff. That's kind of remarkable and really interesting.
So with that dynamic difficulty feature that you put in there in that system, another I guess I'd say, macro topic that often comes up with simulation-based games, especially X-COM influenced games, is sort of just save-scumming is what the term is that we use these days, as you're obviously probably familiar with. And Brett and I talk about save-scumming a fair amount because, there's always that sort of conundrum of, well, I've grown attached to this squad, and if they die, I don't want them to die, so I'm going to save a lot and reload if I have a bad turn or something. And so with the dynamic difficulty system you mentioned, and if you're save-scumming a lot and essentially kind of coming out of a mission pretty much on top because you save-scum and didn't lose anybody, or kind of you through the save system have kind of created the perfect mission you've played through in the perfect way, that essentially is tricking the game into thinking you're doing better than you probably are. And so would that basically ramp up the tech tree for the enemy?
Yes, good point. Yes, you're right. That's exactly what would happen. Yes.
Yeah.
So if you start relying on save-scumming, you're probably going to have to rely on it right up to the end of the game.
Yeah.
So basically, I put my petard on a crane and lifted it high into the sky as I've been playing this game because I almost never lose a mission of any kind.
Yeah. So that would definitely ramp up the difficulty faster for sure.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's funny because there's this. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just whether it would actually make it easier to not do amazingly well every mission, but still kind of, just lose a few rookies, hire a few rookies, make sure they get killed, some kind of thing.
Red shirts.
Maybe it might ultimately make the game a bit easier in the long run. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I'm not sure is the answer. I really don't know exactly how well this dynamic difficulty works. Like I say, we had very little chance to actually test it when we were developing the game.
Yeah.
I think it works to a reasonable extent, at least in giving the player a reasonable challenge. There still is an overall problem with the difficulty curve, from start to finish. I mean, it's not say a gentle ramp up in difficulty.
Right.
To some extent, there's a bit of a ramp down. I think probably the early part of the game is probably more difficult. But I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I'm wrong.
I feel like that's kind of been my experience, though I'm still expecting some big failures down the way in my playthrough, but I do feel like the early game is really pretty punishing, and then I did hit a bit of a plateau, and I'm feeling more confident. But I mean, it's. Mm-hmm. I was just going to add that difficulty level, the difficulty of the game, and it's fascinating to hear how hot it came in, and that you guys never really got to fully, play through, or at least you didn't get to play through all the way to kind of before it launched. Because the difficulty is something that has become, and we actually talk about the Dark Souls series quite a bit on the podcast, because it's kind of a recent example of that return to hard games, that have some learning curves that people are really appreciating these days, like players are, and how that impacts development today. And I feel like all the stories of my friends who just loved this game from back in their youth, the difficulty was a big draw, that. Yeah, it may not have been, it's as the curve and the sort of punishing opening and stuff was not for everybody, but those who got into it, like, they love this game, and I do now as well, because I kind of bounced off of it so many times throughout my life, and then the podcast forced me to play it this time. But I wonder if that difficulty, despite you kind of not getting to fully tune it the way you probably wanted to, maybe that ended up being kind of a happy accident for a lot of people who were looking for something like that.
It probably was a happy accident, yes.
Fingers crossed, and then throw it out there. And
I mean, really, the game needed another 6 months of development for sure.
Story of our lives.
I was worried about it being too easy as much as it being too difficult, because that's both situations are not so good. Maybe I was erring towards making it more difficult. Those are the days when gamers were gamers.
Right.
And, maybe to some extent, Dark Souls has sort of proved that there are still gamers who still like a really tough challenge.
Yeah.
And for me, Dark Souls is absolutely impossible. I can't even get past the first boss. So I mean,
it's a whole different thing. Yeah.
I guess it kind of worked out quite well in a large part by accident at the time. I guess also the four guys doing the QA did a good job. They absolutely did their level best to make sure that stuff was going well, and we did rely a lot on their feedback. And I think they deserve some credit for actually making the final product what it was.
Yeah, I mean, when you said 4 people, I'm actually ex-QA myself from 20 years ago, but so I definitely, and we've had testers on the podcast to kind of talk about their experience, and a lot of respect for QA, because they are really a critical part of any team. And to say that this game, now that we've spent so many hours with it, had only 4 testers is really astounding, because it is super, the layers of depth, and we're still unlocking those layers as we're playing, and 30 and 40 hours in, there's still whole systems that we haven't even seen.
Did you provide QA with any sort of debugging tools, or just readouts or printouts to explain where they were so that they could test against that, or anything like that, or were they just sitting down and playing the game?
I'm trying to remember. We did enable some cheats for them, yes. What I did to test the game is I had different ways to sort of jump in at any point in the game that I thought was relevant in terms of the alien progression and new progression, and just tested bits and pieces that way. But it was very difficult to. I mean, we could have put a much better sort of cheat system in to sort of test the game at any stage, I guess. But I don't think we did anything very sophisticated like that now.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other kind of topic we talked quite a bit about was we were kind of boiling it down as describing it as sort of a sense of discovery, because obviously the manual had some stuff in it, but there really wasn't that much in there in the grand scheme of things. And I'd like to hear like how intentional some of that stuff was from your guys' perspective of this sense of research and discovering what the game actually had to offer through research and through these missions and collecting the loot, as you said, and even just the descriptions. The writing in it is quite good and provocative for obviously the theme of UFO and alien autopsies and all that stuff. Really, it all kind of feels very cohesive. But was that an explicit goal that you guys had to sort of have this onion, layers of an onion that was really hidden to the player until you actually did all this research? It seems like a really intentional part.
Oh yeah, it's completely intentional. Yeah, so basically the research system is basically the way the story of the game is told. I mean, this is exactly our intention.
It's very cool.
That you're not just researching technology to reverse engineer it. You're learning about what the aliens are up to, what their purpose is, what their nature is, and that will then helps you build things to fight them, and so on.
And everyone's going to have a different story because you're researching in your own order, which is fascinating too.
It definitely doesn't have any. Yeah, so it's not linear in that sense. No, it's true. That's completely intentional. Absolutely.
That's cool.
We did obviously plan to make it more extensive and have more story elements in it. There was supposed to be the Men in Black in there, which is all about the whole process whereby a country got taken over by the aliens was supposed to be a bit expanded. That you would that were these Men in Black characters. You had to try and fight them because they were actually infiltrating particular cities, and you would have missions inside cities where you had to locate and find the Men in Black and capture them. But they didn't make it in the game. Maybe you didn't need it, but there was a bit more going on with that sort of alien, the whole idea that the aliens were infiltrating government rather than just abducting people. Is that kind of level of paranoia we wanted to put in.
Right. I feel like I read a description someplace where that was kind of mentioned loosely, where some of the aliens were infiltrating the government, but maybe that was still in there, or maybe that was from. I think it
probably was. Yeah.
I think that was from my base, having the base in the U.S. pulling out because of having some sort of other contact that it doesn't describe to you directly. I think that
made a deal.
What you're thinking of. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then the other bunch of topics we talked about was really just sort of the ground combat itself. I'd love to hear, procedural. This was again like we said, this was the first procedural and fully systemic game that we've played on the podcast. So, is there any tidbits that you could share about procedurally generated level design with the tile-based system that you have for the ground stuff? And the audience might be interested in that because we just haven't played anything like this yet. And was that, I guess you probably picked, you had a lot of that from Laser Squad that you had already learned. I don't remember if Laser Squad in that era was procedural or not, but
no, it wasn't.
Okay,
so what we did with XCOM was a completely new thing, and it was quite simple. And it basically, we had the maps, the environments were built from these basically 10 by 10 tile sections, which were pseudo-randomly put together to make a map. I think we had sort of edge IDs, so certain edge IDs had to match and so on. Some of the UFOs were actually fixed maps of various sizes. And of course your base was, the actual base map was dependent exactly on how you'd actually built the layout of your base. But the randomness was sufficient to actually give each tactical mission this sort of lack of repetition, and it's basically fairly unique. But it's a very simple system. It was difficult for us to implement it because we had to We had to connect some of our nodes in there, which were used for the AI, because we had short and long range sort of pathfinding in the game. And it's in terms of the level design, because I did all the level design for it. There wasn't actually a very large number of separate sections for each type of environment. It was actually quite small, but it was enough to make each battle a unique sort of experience.
Yeah,
it was just enough.
Just enough.
Just enough to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And then, but then also jungle and desert and like, it gets pretty expanded, and then city and then bases. Yeah, it's pretty impressive the breadth of the game. When it comes to all that. And again, as you've been pointing out with your love of systemic games, like you get that breadth with systems, and because you can kind of keep expanding with just the systemic aspect of the simulation, and it's really. It's a gem when it comes to that genre for sure. Just with such a small team. I guess when you had listed everybody out there, I looked at the credits and kind of you look at it there, but then when it comes to who actually was making the game, it really wasn't that many of you, and that's really impressive.
Yeah, exactly. For most of the development, which was nearly how long was it actually? It's 3 years. It must have been a bit slightly over 3 years, I think. Yeah, it was just me, Nick, and the two artists.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the project, we had John Broomhall did the music. Fantastic job he did with that.
Yeah.
And,
so good. The most tense music. I love it.
Yeah.
Because it just gives me nightmares right now. Just like getting through.
It was really good. The music was absolutely excellent. And actually, John will be doing the music for Phoenix Point. You'll be glad to know.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he will be.
That's awesome.
Well, we should probably turn and talk a little bit of Phoenix Point.
Yeah,
as we're getting here to the end, we want to give you a chance to talk about it and your more recent career, if you'd like to touch on anything. So the big advance, as you mentioned earlier, is really going deep on this higher level, the strategic geoscape type stuff. And you touched on civilization. Are there other influences? I'm now kind of curious, having heard your influences earlier. Is there other? Where are you drawing from this time?
Right. Well, I am drawing, definitely drawing from X-COM Apocalypse for sure. And although X-COM Apocalypse is set in a city, set in the future, this sort of dystopian megacity, it was interesting in the way that you had these different organizations and corporations and gangs and stuff that were all sort of interacting in this environment, and you relied on these corporations to buy weapons from them. So if you pissed them off, they wouldn't sell you any stuff, or if one of the gangs was hostile to the corporation, they would start trying to shoot down their supply ships. That if you bought stuff from them, and their ships would come to your base, and if you got shut down, you didn't get the stuff. And there are all kinds of things that could go on there, which is quite interesting. There's a sort of economic and diplomacy system in X-COM Apocalypse, and that sort of it exists in a different way, but in a way, a much stronger way in Phoenix Point, where you have a world which has been decimated, and most of human civilization is fractured and split into these very isolated havens, but there are like 3 factions which are very strong and gaining followers as the game starts, and you have to either ally with them or fight them or trade with them, but you can't ignore them entirely. And I guess the other big influence in Phoenix Point in terms of the theme is sort of this H.P. Lovecraftian style sort of science fiction horror theme.
I'm very excited about that aspect of it.
Which is very strong in the game, though I can't reveal too much about the story. So unlike Lovecraft, who set all of his stories in a sort of contemporary setting, ours is set in the near future, like 30 years in the future. But there are lots of story elements which go way back into the past as well, which are quite important. And there is an alien worshipping cult, which is one of the main factions in the game, who possess certain secrets which you will have to learn during the course of the game. And there also is this focus on the idea that aliens are kind of hybridizing with human beings and other animals on Earth. It comes from this idea that there's this particular type of virus we call the Pandora virus, which is capable of doing lots of very, very clever mutations, and the Pandora virus itself has this massive genome which is bigger than any cell, any known living animal cell on Earth. So the mutations begin, so the aliens begin at a very low level. In fact, there's a slightly opposite way around to the original XCOM. So the aliens begin at a very low tech level in Phoenix Point, and they are dangerous, but they're not especially sort of nasty on the battlefield. But they actually learn from battle, and they start using the things that you're using against them. And they start to create larger mutations, and they often involve different parts of different animals. And once they start incorporating human DNA into these mutations, they develop intelligence, and they will use this mutation system to switch their tactics. So if you start again beating them to a pulp in a tactical battle, they will resort to a mutation process. A lot of random elements in it, but it starts to give you a new challenge pretty quickly. So yeah, it's still has turn-based tactical combat, and it borrows a bit from the original XCOM in the sense we have a sort of implicit time unit system, we have an inventory management system, and we have a sort of more realistic sort of ballistic system. But it does borrow, I think, a fair amount from the way the interface works in the Firaxis XCOM. We don't worry too much about facing and crouching. A lot of things are done automatically like they are in new XCOM, but you still do have sort of time units there, and you still have a bit more freedom in sort of managing your inventory. And what else can I say about the game?
Yeah, wow, it sounds epic.
Yeah, it does. So it does have a geoscape, which is very similar in functionality to the original one, but this time all of the locations of the human settlements and alien bases, and even your bases, are quite highly randomized. So the initial setup of the game is quite different each time.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot more 4X kind of stuff.
Yes, it's very 4X-y.
With XCOM as well, like tactical.
Yes. The only thing, the main difference, I guess, with 4X game is the fact that although the factions, and in fact also you as a player can expand your control influence, it's usually very temporary because the human population is basically going down, not up. And it's basically a race to find a solution to the alien problem.
Oh, good point. Yeah, it's the opposite of expansion then. So it's 4X without that X in a way.
But at the start of the game, for the player, there is a lot of exploration to do. And when you make contact with havens and factions, there's sort of diplomacy elements involved in it as well.
Oh, I can't wait. So it sounds like you've kind of mentioned story quite a bit.
Sim game to end all sim games at this point. I mean, we'll be playing this one for years.
Be careful, right? So you mentioned story a lot. Do you mean kind of an explicit story or the story in the sense that we talked about earlier where there's discovery through research? There's actually an explicit story.
There is an explicit story,
or whatever you can talk about. I don't want to box you in.
Basically, each of the three factions knows something a little bit different about what's going on, and they each have their own sort of solution to the alien problem. And so there's basically three possible endings to the game. Each one is sort of equally valid, I guess.
Cool. So what does Phoenix Point mean? Is that should that be obvious to me, and I'm not getting
Phoenix Point is the name of the base that you start from.
Got it. Okay.
The Phoenix Project is a project set up after the Second World War by the United Nations to research alien threats, or at least known alien presence on planet Earth.
Oh my God, this is pressing all the buttons for me.
But the Phoenix Project itself suffered quite badly during the Cold War and suffered from a lack of funding at certain points. So when this new alien menace becomes known in the mid 2020s, the Phoenix organization is in a very weak state, and you as a player represent basically just one cell of this organization. So you're coming together at one base, you're just a tiny handful of personnel. You know the location of a couple of other Phoenix bases, but you're not getting anything. You receive no contact from the central command, you're not getting any contact from the other bases. So you have to basically find out what's actually happened to the rest of the Phoenix Project. So that's one of your sort of main missions at the start of the game. And when you do find these other Phoenix bases, you can reactivate them. You'll find interesting things there, and you'll discover a lot more about, again, mostly through the research system, but also through actually discovering these places. You'll find out what happened to the Phoenix organization, where the aliens come from, and you have some clues as to how to solve it. So, yeah, there's a lot more story elements. We actually got a writing team on the game. There's 2 writers on it, which are already producing very interesting short stories, which you can read from our website.
Cool. Check those out.
Yeah, it's www.phoenixpoint.info. There's a really nice collection of short stories there. Some of them are very Lovecraftian in tone, but they all deal with the history of the world leading up to the start of the game. So you can get some interesting background info on the world of Phoenix Point.
Yeah, looking at the wiki for the game, you guys have released a lot of stuff, a lot of content on the website for kind of this backstory, which is a great idea.
Stories, yeah.
Can we get sort of a target date or time frame? When are you hoping to ship it?
We are going to ship it at the end of next year.
Q4 of 18.
But podcasts that discuss your previous games will get early beta access, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, of course. It goes without saying. Yeah. So we will be releasing a very early version to our backers because we raised money through fig.co. So we got we've got 10,000 backers, actually more than that now. So we'll be releasing an early version to backers in March next year, which will probably start with some of the tactical systems in the game without the geoscape. And we'll do sort of major releases every 3 months up to release at the end of next year.
Wow, that's fantastic. I definitely look forward to it because this has been such an engrossing game, I know, for both of us. And both of us have become really, really hooked. And I'm already starting to think about starting over with knowledge gained this afternoon, and tailoring my strategy a little bit more to what I know now to be going on. So that is fantastic, and I might just be able to complete a game of XCOM before Phoenix Point comes out.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really revelatory. It's really, really fascinating to hear both the early stories and sort of your relationship with the publisher, which I didn't expect to get into at all. So just some fantastic stuff here. Thank you so much, Julian.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Honor. Wanted to get you on for so long, and I know a lot of the listeners were excited to have you on as well. So really thanks and especially with the time difference for the listeners that don't know. Julian is in is in Bulgaria, and it is midnight where he is right now as we're recording. So after midnight. So really going the extra mile for the podcast. So we really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you.
Well, that was fantastic. There were so many things we covered that I didn't expect to cover, but especially for me, I guess a couple of things. One was the publisher angle, and the other was some of those early influences that we were unaware of. But it's such an interesting time in the industry, and we never really talk about the publisher side of things in those negotiations, and it was so pertinent here.
Yeah. I mean, just as to have that kind of publisher interaction at that era seems rare, at least in my head. I know it happened, and it's something that happens every project now for the most part, other than indie stuff. But to have it be that dominant, and it's nice to know, as he said, that they were open to it and embraced it. Oftentimes it's not the case. But
not only that, they saved it.
Yeah, they saved it. Oh yeah, that was the story that I couldn't remember. How Spectrum Holobyte had actually technically canceled the project, and
right.
Microprose UK kept it going under the radar. Nice joke, by the way.
Thank you.
And then it kind of comes in and saves the day. I mean, that's amazing. That's a little bit like the Fallout story that we got from Tim. That just kind of the history of what was actually going on inside the company at the time. And this was a little, obviously a very different situation. And Julian wasn't technically a part of, or Mythos wasn't a part of Microprose, but still, man, crazy.
It's amazing. And so strange that Microprose was doing another game to cannibalize their own market was just a strange thing. But I mean, I guess to a certain extent, publishers of that era were kind of known for certain things, and it wasn't like a super broad catalog like you would have from an EA today, for example.
Yeah,
where they do everything.
And probably Sid Meier was saying, well, I'm not going to get you one of these a year. So,
right, sure.
So they probably wanted to flip-flop with another, franchise as they were waiting for the next Civ to come out.
Right.
Which in fact was probably every 2 or 3 years.
It was a while between Civ 1 and Civ 2.
Yeah, it feels like it. I mean, we're only on 6 right now. So.
Well, just 2003 or something like that. It's quite a while between Civ 1 and Civ 2. So...
Yeah,
but also Sid Meier had so many different interests.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. He did.
It would be weird. You wouldn't expect him to sort of just do the one thing.
Right.
Let's see. Oh no, Civ 2 is in '96, so I was wrong. Oh, I was thinking of Civ 3, which is the one that we played a bit of at LucasArts. I think that's what I had in mind.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Yeah, it was
fantastic.
Good. It was fun to have him on.
He's basically pushing every single one of your buttons.
Oh my God. When he just started rattling off Phoenix Point, I'm just like, what are you saying right now? That's incredible. I was looking at the wiki simultaneously as he was talking, and Lovecraft is mentioned in there, and yeah, man. Combining this sort of Cold War UFO aesthetic with Lovecraft. John Carpenter's mentioned in there, of course. We have some Thing stuff in there with the creature design and stuff, and then
sure.
and then
that makes a lot of sense when you're talking mutating animals and things like
exactly.
that. Sure. Yeah, that makes
and then
sense.
3 of the 4 X's in a way, is kind of, or really some of the 4X feel, which...
Well, it's
Alpha
really
Centauri...
3 X's for you, but the aliens have an X. They're doing the expansion, right? So,
right, that's
a 4X game, but one of the X's is not for you.
That's well put. Alpha Centauri, actually, I've never been a big Civ fan, but Alpha Centauri was a game that I loved, and I think it was because of the science fiction element of it,
Right.
So they mentioned...
Yeah, I have a copy of
Alpha
Centauri.
Centauri. Yeah.
I quite like that. Quite like that game. Might be something we might look at some point. I think Civ's probably more important to get to sooner.
Eventually, someday.
Someday we gotta do that. But I mean, so many influences on this game, and I love that he's pulling stuff. I went and was looking up things like, certainly Gary Anderson's UFO series, which I had never heard of, though I do know Space 1999. And all of that's available on archive.org, which has all 26, 2 seasons, 26 episodes, like 1970 to 1973.
That's cool.
So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But for Phoenix Point, there was a SETI project called Project Phoenix in the late 90s, which used the telescope in New South Wales, Australia, and then also here in the States for a couple of years. And it targeted nearby solar systems, cosmically nearby, and not actually next door or anything like that, but within 200 light years of Earth, to try to find evidence of alien life. And it concluded that we are most likely in a lonely neighborhood with not a lot going on. So interesting. But I'm glad that he doesn't take that as a starting point, because it's definitely more interesting to think of aliens coming here.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the other thing was that some of the airplane designs from Area 51, which is an Air Force base here in Nevada, I guess, look strikingly similar to the Sky Ranger and the Interceptor. Not exactly the same, but very similar. When he was talking about that, I flipped to that. I was like, oh my God, that's the Sky Ranger.
That's the Alien Liaison book you're in? Is that
right? So that's how I got to it. Right. So Bob Lazar, who he mentioned as being the guy who worked with the Alien Liaison writer, whose name already got away from me. I'll have to look that back up. But he worked. He was sort of his contact.
Yeah.
Timothy Good. Bob Lazar was a guy who claimed to have worked at Area 51 and had all this, information or whatever. And who knows, right? But I don't know, just all very, very interesting and cool to delve into sort of real history and kind of that pseudo history that was around UFOs, certainly in the 80s and 90s. It's the sort of stuff that will crop up on weird alien autopsy type shows on the History Channel, of all things, these days. But to pull that into a game is super cool. So, now I feel like I have to start my game over.
Yeah, he revealed some tricks in there for sure. Some behind the curtain stuff. I'm going to keep going with my current game until it looks inevitable that I'll lose. But I think I have a false sense of confidence with my current.
Yeah. Well, I think I had finally gotten to the point where I knew what I next had to do, which was to go after that alien base. But it makes me worry that I probably can't stop them achieving their nefarious plans.
Yeah,
it might already be too late for me.
Yeah, it sounds like if, as he was saying it, once the base is established in that country, kind of like they have succeeded at their side of it,
Yeah,
so you kind of have to write that country off or something, which that hits your funding. The U.S. is, I think, number 2, right? And as far as funding goes,
yeah, it was like I don't know, $900,000 or something. I lost. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I don't have to add a lot more stuff because I'm pretty well stocked up, so I can probably get away with just getting more rookies and things like that for now. But not being able to manufacture stuff would be tough. So we'll have to see how that goes. It's pretty tight.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to touch on before we talk about what's next?
No. I feel like we hit this one. We hit it on all cylinders. The only thing we didn't really do was fully finish the game. So yeah. I'm gonna, I always threaten to do this, but I'm gonna chip away at it over months. And I'm of the other ones, other than Link Between Worlds, which I ultimately did finish. of the other ones, this, Wasteland 2 or whatever that we played, or even, what's the horror game? The
Evil Within.
Evil Within 2 is out and getting some good buzz, so maybe I'll go back to that one. But of all of the modern ones that we played for the podcast, or ones that we didn't finish, this one still draws me in. I still think I'll be going back to it because it's got its hooks into me. So
I'm pretty hooked. I mean, I was already thinking about playing some of the others. I know not, the whole series is not as well regarded as the first. I know that there's a couple that I think are not critically well received of the original
Terror from the Deep or whatever in those.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll have to research and see which ones, because I don't know, 5-10 years ago, I bought all 5 of them for nothing, $5 or whatever on Steam, and I've had them all these years, just waiting for you to propose a podcast. So,
well, Interceptor, I think, is a space sim, right? Like that's
right. It's a different thing entirely, right?
Yeah. And I think there might be a shooter in there someplace too.
But Apocalypse sounded really interesting.
I didn't know. Yeah, it sounds like, because he didn't work on the second one, which was the undersea one.
Right.
But he did work on
Apocalypse. It feels like they were different. They were very different feeling games, and that's kind of interesting too. I probably won't play any of them nearly as in depth as this one.
No.
But it would be fun to kind of take a look and see how the series evolved. Okay, well, with that, I guess we'll just turn briefly. I had put out on Twitter that we might not be able to get the interview done this weekend, but it came together at the last minute, and we recorded it. So we are putting off our first discussion of Silent Hill 2 to next week, of course. And I am so looking forward to hearing what you think of that game. It's very different to me than Resident Evil.
Yeah,
and
I'm excited.
I played a little bit of it this weekend, and it was already. It has its claws into me already, in terms of how it works. I will put out on Twitter where to play to, and also, of course, let you know. And we may spread it out over 3. We haven't really decided. We were going to try to do it in 2, but I don't want to put too much pressure on Tim's schedule either. So we'll see how it goes. But we're not going to read any email this week, though we did have some. We will try to get to all of that next week. And you can shoot that to devgameclub@gmail.com. We love to hear your thoughts, suggestions, questions, compliments, and criticisms. So by all means, keep sending those. And of course, if you have a moment, rate and review us on iTunes and subscribe to the cast if you haven't already. And for what it's worth, tell a friend. We do no advertising. We make no money from this podcast, so we're really just kind of trying to get it out there by word of mouth and things like that. So we appreciate every new listener. I guess that's all for us this week. You can find me on Twitter, although I'm taking a Twitter break, at Brett_Duville, and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
I will continue to maintain and look at the site's Twitter, or the podcast Twitter, which is at DevGameClub. So I will certainly see you there if you chat at me. Thanks so much, and good night.
Good night.